What's going on, guys? I'm Bill and welcome to Bill's How To. Today I'm going to show you guys how to transform an ugly old set of drawers for less than $80 into something that looks like this. Let's do this. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the old drawers. Luckily for me, I don't need the old washers that are on these handles. So I'm going to reuse the same handles that came with this set of drawers. However, that white washer, luckily, I'm missing some of them and it's a separate piece to the handle itself. So that means I can detach the two, keep the old existing handle and get rid of these white washers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the whole bottom section, including the drawers, in vivid white in an enamel paint. So we've got here a paint and prime, which is a water-based semi-gloss paint. The reason why we're using this is because the bottom section we're going to need to prime it, and rather than having to put the primer separate and the paint separate, we'll get it all in one. So we've got some sandpaper, 80 grit, 120, 240, and we've got our stain and varnish. So the stain and varnish is going on the top. That is in deep mahogany, and what we're planning on doing here is using the 80 grit sandpaper to completely remove all that varnish from the top, or the old stain from the top, and restain the top section. So that section that I'm holding right now is the section that we're going to restain, and the bottom section is going to be completely painted. So we're going to start off with using 120 grit sandpaper for the bottom section. If you don't have a sanding block, just any old piece of timber like I've got here will do the trick. Just wrap your sandpaper around that sanding block or around the piece of timber and you're able to sand that section out. So with the bottom section, because we're not staining that section, all we need to do is basically remove that sheen or the glossy section off the old stain. So I'm using the 120 grit sandpaper. It comes off fairly easily. All we need to do is remove that gloss and then just scuff it up a bit so that we can get the primer to stick to that surface. I'm using the sanding block initially on all the flat sections. However, because the sides have a little bit of a contour to it, I'm going to get rid of the sanding block in a second and I'll just simply use my hand. That way I can get around those grooves and get the sandpaper in nice and tight, and I'll find it's a lot faster and easier to do that way. So you can see down the bottom there's a bit of engraving into the timber. The easiest way that I've found to get the sandpaper into there is to just simply fold it up, get it in nice and flat, and use the edge of the sandpaper to be able to get through all those grooves. Remembering down the bottom, that whole bottom section of the set of drawers is going to be painted, so we don't have to get all of it out. We just have to simply scuff it up a bit and remove that gloss. Once again, using the edge of the sandpaper just to get in nice and tight through those little grooves, especially in those corners. We just want to make sure we get rid of all that gloss. If you guys want to see a video with a bit more detail, let me know in the comment section below and I'll have another one coming up a little bit later. So now that we've got the bottom section completely deglossed and we've also scuffed it up a bit so the primer can stick to it, we're going to start on the top section using the 80 grit sandpaper. So the whole purpose here is to completely remove that stain and get it down to the timber as much as possible, so that way we can get the new stain to seep through that timber. Remembering that if you're painting it, doesn't matter, you don't have to completely remove it, but if you are going to stain it, you want to make sure that you get the depth of that color and the color to be consistent throughout the timber. The best way to do that is to completely remove the old stain. So unfortunately for me, I learned the hard way that top section of the set of drawers was actually not timber, it was a veneer. So it's basically a laminated looking timber, and there's no way I could sand that down. So I had to eventually plane that top section down and sand it instead, but hopefully you guys won't run into that. So I've completely taken that part of the step out of this video, but like I said, basically I just put the planer straight on top, got rid of that veneer and then sanded the surface down. So the top section is actually MDF. A little bit disappointing because I wanted to show that grain and have the grain pop through once I get the stain on there, but unfortunately this time around we're going to have to make do the best with the MDF. So now for the face of the drawers, once again we're doing the exact same process as the bottom section of the furniture, and we're going to be painting these in the vivid white once again. So once again, 120 grit sandpaper, deglossing it, that's all we're doing, and scuffing up the surface so the primer will actually stick to it. And once the sanding is completely finished, guys, this is what it looks like. You can see the hideous MDF on top. A little bit disappointing, but we'll still get the stain to go through that with no problems. We're just going to basically miss out on all that nice grain that would usually pop through. So just quickly before we get started, we've got a little bit more prep work. We have to first clean everything up, get a wet rag and just wipe it all down, make sure there's no dust, no residue, nothing left on the surface. And then when we have a look at the top of the furniture, we can see that there's a crack running up the top of it. That one there, we can't actually re-nail it. There's no play in it whatsoever. So that what we're gonna have to do in this case is use some timber filler. The only thing to be careful of when using a timber filler is you need to make sure that it's sandable, it's stainable, and it's also paintable, because we're going to be doing all three. So we just need to make sure that we're using the right filler before we get started. So while we're waiting for that timber filler to dry off, we'll get started on painting the drawers. So once again, we're using a semi-gloss enamel paint. It's water-based and it's in vivid white. You can use so many different methods. You can spray it, roll it, brush it on. I'm showing you guys the absolute cheapest way so that we keep it under $80. You can do this on a budget. We're using a brush, very, very simple. It goes on fairly uneven at first, and that's simply because it needs to adhere to the surface. This one here's got a primer in it as well, so that means that it's going to dry up a little bit quicker, especially when it's very humid as it is today. So we just have to move very, very quickly, keeping a wet edge. I'm not too concerned about how it goes on, but we need to make sure that we can spread that paint out and get a nice even surface. So the best way that I've found to do this is to simply use the tip of the brush and just have nice long strokes, trying to keep those brush marks out of the paint. And once the first coat's done, this is basically what it looks like. So it's a little bit disheartening initially. If your surface looks like this once you've painted it with the first coat, don't be worried. This is exactly what it's supposed to look like. The second coat's going to hide a lot more, and then we're going to follow it through with the third coat. So now the timber filler's completely dried off. We're using 120 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to very, very lightly go over that timber filler and get it nice and smooth once again, making sure to clean that off before we get started. So now we're using the stain. The way I like to apply the stain is by using just a rag, any kind of clean cloth, and you can spread that stain straight onto the surface. The reason why I'm using a little tiny brush is simply to be able to cut in the bottom section and reduce any chance of having any of that stain get on the section that's going to be painted. So that's the only reason why I'm cutting in with a brush at the moment. I'm just going to quickly cut around, and then we're going to get straight into spreading the stain. So now when it comes to applying the stain, guys, it's very, very simple and straightforward. Just apply a little bit to a clean cloth, wipe it straight over the top, and keep that nice and consistent. So we don't want any heavy spots. Just wipe it straight across and you'll be able to see the color instantly change. So generally speaking, when you're applying the stain, you want to go with the grain. However, with the top section here, we don't really have a grain. We're using MDF, or unfortunately we've got MDF to work with on top, so we don't have any grain to follow. So that means I can go in any direction as long as I'm fairly consistent. So once the first coat's done, this is what it looks like. It's not perfect, it's not very nice at the moment. We're simply just applied as much as we could on the first coat. You can still see the timber showing through the stain, and that's no problem. That's exactly what it's supposed to look like on the first coat. Second coat, we're gonna get a lot more depth, and then once again on the third coat, it's gonna look even better. And repeat the same process for the second coat. So now the second coat's complete. You can see it's a lot more consistent, it's a lot more evenly spread, when we're starting to really get that depth of color in. So now we're doing the second coat on the drawers. Once again, remembering using the tip of the brush, nice long strokes, and we want to avoid showing any of those brush marks, so we need to move fairly quickly. So now it's time for the third and final coat for a stain and varnish, and you can see now we've got full depth of color and it's starting to look really nice. So now we're on our third coat of paint for our drawers. Once again, same process, nice long strokes using the tip of the brush. And once we're done, guys, this is the finished product. So it looks very, very nice, very consistently spread with the paint, and we can barely see those brush marks. So we've got exactly the result that we were after. So now the stain is dried, it's time to start painting. We just need to be very careful getting that initial cut in right up on the top. We need to make sure we don't get any paint on the already stained surface. And we're going to be doing the exact same process. So nice long strokes, moving relatively fast because in this temperature it's fairly humid, it's drying pretty quick. So we need to make sure that we're moving fairly quick, keeping a wet edge and just using the tip of the brush. That way we're going to eliminate any chance of seeing those brush marks. So once again, this is what it looks like after you've completed your first coat. It doesn't look nice, that's the honest truth, but this is the way it's supposed to look. So if you're doing this yourself at home and your one looks like this after the first coat, don't be alarmed, this is exactly the way it's supposed to look. After the second and third coat, everything's going to tie in nicely. So now we're going to repeat the process for our second coat and once again for our third coat. So once we're done, guys, this is the finished product. So it took me a total of about 5 to 6 hours, just under $80. Not too bad for a day's work, especially considering the initial state that it was in. Most people usually tend to throw these kinds of furniture away. If you guys want to see more DIY videos, if you'd like to see a bit more detail in the next video, let me know in the comment section below. I'd be happy to do it. As always, guys, like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Bill. Thanks for watching. Bill's out too.